So this summer, I got the opportunity to hear this guy speak on open source at LinuxCon in Toronto. And got really excited about the ideas I heard. Great guy, really articulate, successful. And listened to his talk, wrote down all these notes. I said, the next time I get an opportunity to give a talk, I'm going to take some of his ideas in true open source fashion, remix them, and redistribute them. We'll get to that in a minute. So as you can probably tell, I'm an open source fan. I do stuff with open source communities, software companies, and I currently work at the Linux Foundation, which is great. So when Todd called me on Monday, he said, hey, I have a cancellation in the schedule. I said, that's too bad, Todd. How can I help you out? He's like, well, I'd like you to fill one of the keynote spots, and I'd like you to talk about open source. I'm like, I'm there. That's my gig. I'm like, great. So I started writing my slides. I said, I saw this guy this summer, and he was awesome, and got me thinking about how we do open for good. I said, so Todd, when do you want me to go on? He goes, I want you to go on after Jim Whitehurst. I said, as you might have guessed by now, the guy who gave the talk, who got me all fired up about Open for Good, was Jim Whitehurst. So I had to come up with a new talk. So as you notice, I have my own little confidence monitor next to me because I have some notes. I haven't had a whole bunch of time to bake these, but I'm sure they'll be entertaining and hopefully helpful. So I said, well, Jim Whitehurst, he usually, Red Hat has all over their building these quotes, and I'd written down this quote, and if you noticed, he said, first they fight you, then they ignore you, then you win. And I'm like, damn, can't quote Gandhi. So I started to think, who else is inspiring? Who do people quote? Who gets people fired up? I'm like, who do they mention in the same breath as Gandhi? Henry Rollins. You guys know Henry Rollins? Legendary punk rocker, activist, speaker, and actually a really good guy. And over the last few weeks, I've been watching YouTube videos in my spare time, and they have Henry Rollins' talks. I'm like, this guy's amazing. It's like not just rock and roll, but being a better person and making the world better. I'm like, and they tell stories about all the punk rockers he's met, and Iggy Pop and the Stooges and David Bowie and all these stories. And I'm like, you know what? There's some similarities. He's like, this sounds really familiar. So I said, I think open source has a lot of the same qualities as punk rock. And I tell this to somebody, and they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, really. I'm like, think about it. So here's the definition or this is the Wikipedia entry on punk rock. And if you look at it, punk rock was about self-produced products or works of art, distributed through informal channels, technical accessibility, DIY spirit, all part of the punk rock movement. Freedom, so people could do what they want. Authenticity. All these are the values that we have in the open source community. The thing that's interesting is that something that started out as a small movement became mainstream. Green Day, Blink-182, The Offspring all have multi-platinum records. They're part of mainstream music today. So it goes even further. The leaders of the punk rock movement bear a striking similarity to people in our movement. You guys know who that is? Joey Ramone. Know who that is? Richard Stallman. It's scary, the similarities. Richard Stallman is the leader of the free software movement and the Free Software Foundation. Know who that is? Sid Vicious, Sex Pistols, British rocker. Linus Torvalds. They're like separated at birth twins. So maybe not everything is an exact match. But there are a lot of things about the punk rock movement that I think are interesting, that it is a movement to make change in the world. People that were mad about the way that things were said what they were mad about and screamed at the top of their lungs. That's the part that's interesting and similar, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that. We are in a very interesting time in open source. 25 years ago, when Linus started the Linux kernel, he just wanted to do something to scratch his own itch. He did not do something that was best of breed. Unix was much better. He was collaborative with people, but it wasn't a big thing. I think his quote was, "Nothing big and fancy, just a hobby, blah, blah, blah." Today, we have best-in-breed software that is open source. Big data, we have Hadoop. Jim mentioned that big data is a big thing. Kubernetes is a category killer. It's a cloud orchestration layer. We have Google open sourcing TensorFlow, which is AI. Docker, all these software, there isn't a commercial alternative that isn't of at least as good a value, and sometimes these softwares are leading the way. The other thing is we have a worldwide network of to share the ideas, and we have a voice, Twitter, Facebook, etc. So what I wanted to talk to you today about is how to make open source for good happen, and what I learned from punk rocker. First thing, make it personal. The people that have been most successful in open source are the people that are scratching their own itch. And those people have been technology people, people that are solving IT problems. I think that's great, and I think that should continue to happen, but I'd like to take it a step forward and think about other industries other than IT, even farther than Jim did with Ford. I want to talk about something that's personal to me and an industry I think is ripe for change. This is the day it really got personal for me. This is June 4th, 2012. I was over here in the emergency room of Rex Hospital. I had an accident, and I couldn't walk. And I had assumed at this point in time that the medical technology was so good that I could find an easy fix. So I didn't sweat it too much until after the doctor came back and said, well, we're going to have to operate. You'll probably be in the hospital. You won't be able to walk for a few months. It's a little scary. What I didn't know was that he had told my wife and my best friend he didn't know if I'd walk again. Luckily, I did. But what was incomprehensible to me was that we could operate drones halfway across the world to bomb people we didn't know. Kim Kardashian could take a picture and share it with her 20 million Instagram followers. But the technology that we needed to make people's lives better and end suffering is really far behind. I thought the $6 million man that I had seen as a child was real. By now, it wasn't. This is the state of the art in prosthetics. This is the Dorrance Hook. It was patented in 1912. It is the standard for amputee arms in America, in the world today. And I was made aware of this by a guy who came up with the $6 million meme at a bar camp at Red Hat's old headquarters over in Centennial campus, a guy named Jonathan Cunningham who talked about the Open Prosthetic Project. And he said, imagine if the technology in your lives advanced at the same pace as prosthetic arm technology. Imagine if your iPhone wasn't updated for 100 years, or your Mercedes. At that point, I thought maybe we need a Moore's Law in healthcare. This prosthetic hand was built for $500. A prosthetic arm hand costs somewhere around $60,000 today, and it usually has single-digit capabilities. It was built by a 15-year-old in 2012 using open source hardware, Linux and Arduino. In 2015, the same kid, sorry, I don't mean to be pejorative there, Easton LaChapelle, open sourced his design. It allows you to build arms using 3D printing for less than $500. Downloaded off the internet under Creative Commons. So that's really important to me. When you go around this today, if you work at the drug company, you work in government, you work in an industry other than IT, or you work in IT for those industries, take back what you learn. That's how you can make a change. That's how you can do open for good. Number 2, be inclusive. Can't stress this enough. I commend the staff of the All Things Open for having a code of conduct. It's important, especially as we sit in North Carolina where some of our legislation has not been favorable to being inclusive. I encourage everyone next month to share your thoughts on that. One of the great things about open source, and those of you who've been in open source know there is actually an open source definition. And it has certain things in the open source definition, including the free distribution, source code, et cetera. But 5 of the 10 things that we define open source as are about being inclusionary. No discrimination against persons or groups. No discrimination against fields of endeavor. License must not be specific to a product. All these values are in part of our movement that says, hey, we want everybody to be able to participate. We don't want to have barriers to participation. It's really important. Share. Now, inherently by making source code available, we do share. But there's more things to share than just the source code, and this is why I love All Things Open. So I just took a few of the many, many awesome talks here, but I think it's a really brave thing for a person who sits in a server room or behind a computer screen all day developing code to tell their personal stories, because that's what you can't get from reading the documentation, is how to do this and how to do it better and why to do it. Those are the things that I think we should take back, along with, hey, the latest and greatest in Docker, Kubernetes, or Ansible, or whatever turns you on, you should take that back. But the experience that people share is invaluable. Involve the next generation. This is a picture from LinuxCon of Maker Kids and Kids for Computers. IT folks were teaching younger people how to program Arduino robots and install Linux. Whenever you can, you need to turn on the next generation of people to not just the technology, but how we bring technology to light. So we can do open for good. So we can have the next Easton LaChapelle solving prosthetic problems. Hopefully the next Easton LaChapelle solves cancer problems, water problems, energy problems, because we turned them on to the way we do things. Teach them. One of my favorite sites out there is edX. They allow you to make information on this stuff accessible really, really easily. You can get a full education on computer science right online. Finally, talk to people. You'd think this would be evident by now, but it really isn't. Get out from behind your keyboard. Come on in, the water is nice. It is really, really hard to disagree with someone when you've met them full on, eye to eye, face to face. So come to ATO, go to a maker fair, go to your meetups, go to the city camp with Jason Hibbett's here, talking about how to open up your government. That's important. So that's how you should get what I think you should do to get the most out of ATO and open source. You're the punk rockers of the 21st century. The DIY attitude, the authenticity, philosophies of open source to drive innovation for greater good. That's us, man. So, rock on.